Okay, now I have some printouts of some of the book covers that you designed, and I'd like to go through these in a similar way that we went through the real book covers. Most of these book covers have some things that are working really well, and most of them also have some things that could use some improvement. So there's quite a variety here. I did find a book that was almost exactly the dimension that our book cover is, and I put one of these printouts on the book. I wrapped it around there, okay, so that it's almost like looking at a real book. And I use this one because I think overall, if we think about the things that we discussed and observed in the real book covers, this one I think is the most successful. Um, I see rule of thirds being used on the cover. 2/3, 1/3. The title of the book is definitely the largest largest text or type that we see on the cover, and then the author's name is significantly smaller, but it's still very easy to identify this name as the author's name. Maybe this is a little bit too big. Maybe it's competing with the name of the author. I think this is important, but could it be a little bit smaller? This, we've got some light text on a relatively light background, so that's quite a bit different than the actual book jacket designs that we looked at, where we really didn't see this happening. We usually had, or really almost always had, a good contrast between the text and the background. So maybe this is something that can be thought about. Maybe this could be black instead of white on that blue background. Take a look at the spine, and I think that the spine is working very well. It's very similar to spines that we looked at on the real books. It's relatively simple. There's a name of the book and then the author's name. There's a little decorative element, which is fine. One thing I might suggest on this one is that it seems to me that maybe this would be a little easier to read or make more sense if this title fit up into this 2/3 area, and then the name of the author fit down into here, so I don't have this place where we've got kind of this complex background. It's hurting the readability of this title a little bit. On the back cover, I think the back cover is working very well. It's got, again, just like we looked at on the real books, there are some reviews, but it's not quite as much as what we saw in the real books. There's the leading on this is a little bit tight. So when we looked at the real books, we saw that there was more space between these lines of text in their paragraphs than there are here. So I think this could be widened up a bit. Okay, but overall, I think this is looking good. If we look at the flaps, again, the text on the flaps is quite a bit larger than the text that we saw on the real books. And if I was talking about body text, which is just normal reading text that you read in paragraphs. Now that we have a real book, we can say, well, this is what body text looks like. It's not that large. This is a lot larger than body text. That said, I think it's attractive and it looks good, and I wouldn't necessarily suggest changing that. There's also, if we look at the back flap, there's a consistency, just like we saw on the real book covers. The style, size, spacing of the text is consistent between the front and the back covers. So, I think that's working very well. There's a photo credit, which I think is very important. There's publisher information and a logo. So this book is working really well. I just suggest a few adjustments to the design on this. These other covers, if we compare some of the covers on here in terms of, let's take a look at rule of thirds. And I think there's a rule of thirds kind of on this, just based on the way that this photo is kind of laid out. So there's a 2/3, 1/3 kind of a quality to that. This is, maybe not quite. Maybe it's like a 3/4, 1/4 sort of a proportion. This one, there's kind of a 2/3, 1/3 thing going on here, but the line is right in the center, so it kind of splits this in half. This one is, again, more of I would say more of like a 3/4, 1/4 proportion. This one, I think the rule of thirds is working pretty well. 2/3, 1/3, or 1/3, 2/3. This one also is working pretty well. 2/3, 1/3. So in terms of the rule of thirds on these, I think that's working out fairly well for the most part. Let's take a look at contrast. So contrast between the text and the background. And this one, I think that there's some problems with the contrast. It's getting very hard to read that text. It's kind of getting lost in the background, and some of it's on dark text on a light background, and there's an attempt here to give it that contrast. Part of that is there's some outlines here, or strokes. So there's some light text with dark stroke, dark text with light stroke. So there's kind of a mixture here, and I really think that it's, rather than helping the readability, I think that it's hurting it. The text is getting really complex, and I think there's got to be another solution. So could, similar to some of these real covers that we looked at, could there be a solid background here, and the text could be inside of that? Or could there be, these are silhouettes. Maybe they could be darker. Maybe the text could have a drop shadow behind it rather than having the strokes, which really kind of cuts into those letter forms, and it makes the letter forms more complex. So I think that the headline on here, or the title of the book, I should say, needs some work. Also, I don't think there's a real distinct hierarchy between the name of the author and the title. So there is a difference in size, but there's not a large enough difference to make it really obvious. So, if you're not sure, go back and take a look at the first video with the real book covers. There was definitely a distinct difference. This one, there's, if we take a look at the contrast and the hierarchy, I think it's working pretty well. So, there's definitely a contrast between the front, the text and the background. There's definitely a difference, a distinctive, purposeful difference between the size of the name, size of the book title and the author's name. This one, that hierarchy is breaking down a bit. So the name of the book is Creative Visualization, but the author's name is about the same size. So, the most important thing should be creative visualization. So could that be pushed so that it's larger and the author's name is smaller? And also there's a subtitle here, which is okay. Again, there's not a big difference. I mean, there are differences in size, but they're not big enough to look purposeful or be really distinct. So I would say, creative visualization should be quite a bit larger. Author's name could probably be smaller. I don't know, maybe this could be about the same size. If the title were larger, then there'd be a distinct difference. This one, I think there's definitely a distinct hierarchy. So that's working well. There's a good contrast between the text and the background, and also this one, again, there is a good contrast between the text and the background. This one, the hierarchy is there. There's a good contrast between the text and the background, except for that's starting to get lost. And this one, I think that the headline, I mean title, is getting lost in the complexity of that image. So you really want to not put your text on a complex background that makes it hard to read. You know, could the title be moved down here to the area that's less visually complicated? I think there's a fairly good contrast between the size of the title and the author's name on that one. Now, if we look at the back covers, and these are, you know, these are flat kind of. I mean, these are, I folded these up, but you're seeing some of the spine as well. But let's just focus on the back cover for now. If we compare these to the real books that we saw, you know, some of them really don't have anything in the background or on the back cover as far as text goes. This one is empty. There's an image, but there's no text. This one, rather than the reviews, there is one review, but then there's a synopsis on the back, which generally goes on the flap. This one is blank, nothing on the back. This one, really not enough. There's one little quote on the back. This one, again, the text is really large. So the real ones that we looked at, the text was more body copy size, between 8 and 12 points. This one is probably, I don't know, 24 points. It's like really, really big. So, you know, it almost to me, and this one as well, almost to me it looks like the designer was trying to fill some space, maybe just didn't have enough material to put on the back and is trying to, you know, what can I do to fill up the back? And that's really not what we want to do. You know, with these decorative elements too, it's not, you know, I'm not sure how purposeful that looks. It's not to say you can't use decorative elements, but you need 2 of them, you know, so think about that. Another thing we can look at is the size of these barcodes. So when I look at the barcodes, let me get this other one in here too. Look at the barcodes, and wow, we have quite a difference. So this seems to be about the standard size. These here look about right compared to the ones that I saw on the real book covers, but then we've got some that are really large, and then one I think that's getting a little bit small. So I think what you want to do on these is you want to kind of try to size these so that they're very similar in size to an actual book. I mean, this is just too big. And to me, again, it gives me the impression that you didn't know exactly what to do with the back cover and you want to fill space. Okay. Let's take a look at the flaps. Okay. And all right. So I'm looking at the flaps. This one has, it kind of looks very similar to something that I saw on a real book cover. It's body copy size. There's a synopsis of the book. There's some paragraph breaks in here in terms of indents. But then on the back cover, you know, this one is actually, it's looking pretty good. So there's a well, one thing that I'd say is it needs to be worked on is when we saw the real books, we saw that the text for the author information was set in exactly the same style as the text for the synopsis on the front cover. And here there's a difference. So this looks smaller than this text, and it should be the same size. All right, this one, we have kind of the same situation going on. So we've got some text on the front that kind of, you know, what we have on the flap are some reviews, which really should go on the back cover. So we've got this reversed. We've got the synopsis on the back cover and the reviews on the flap. But just in terms of the style of text, you know, it's not so bad. It's a little bit larger than some of the text that we saw on the real book covers. There's some uneven spacing here, so you want to be consistent in the way that you're spacing your different paragraphs of text. But then on the back cover, we've got a real long paragraph with no break in here. And then the text is set in a different style. So here it's set in italics, and it's set with a certain leading and size. And then here it's set without italics, and it's set in a different leading and with different kinds of leading, line spacing, and a different size. So again, you want to keep it consistent. They should be they should be the same in terms of the way the body text is set. This one, same thing. This is very, very large text. It's more like text that would go on a subhead or something like that. We have some kind of a decorative font here. I don't know if you can really see that, but it's like it's kind of got a black and white thing going on, and then we have that down here as well. But then on the back cover, we don't have that. So it's a different text style, different font style, different size. So you want to, again, keep it consistent. This one also, I think that's sort of gets the point across there.